I'm Nick Newton, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On this week's episode, we'll cover secondary help on the way, Tom Fornelli's top 25 head coaches in college football, a damn MULLEN for KIRBY smart trade. Interesting topic we heard about this week, and SPURRIER'S recruiting tactics with Bob Stoops. Great story I heard earlier in the week here. But we'll first dive into two bits. And like I said earlier, there's more secondary help on the way here. The transfer portal strikes again. This time, cornerback Jadarius Perkins, who had signed a letter of intent in February with the Missouri Tigers, he announced that he's transferring to in general at the end of April, and he ends up landing in Gainesville to bolster the Florida secondary. A little background on Perkins, Will. He was the number 5 overall JUCO prospect, number 3 JUCO college cornerback, specifically this past recruiting cycle. Played at Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College, and was an Oregon commit for most of the fall. And ends up choosing Missouri over other SEC offers, including Florida. Also had Alabama, Auburn, South Carolina, LSU, and Mississippi State. 6'2", 190 pounds. Will, what type of impact do you expect Perkins will have on this secondary?
I'm not entirely sure. I'm not sure anybody else knows either. I think it's interesting that he's from Hattiesburg. So the guy's from Mississippi. He was originally in the 2018 recruiting class, which means he's probably pretty familiar with Dan Mullen. Also, potentially Todd Grantham from their time at Mississippi State. I think the expectation, though, at Florida is you're going to get Kyrie Elam, obviously, on the outside. People really want to see it. I want to see 5-star recruit Jason Marshall on the other side, which means he's going to be battling guys like Jaden Hill, guys like Ethan Pouncey, guys like Avery Helm, guys like Finley Graham. So, most of the time, these types of players are guys you want to see make an instant contribution on special teams, or he's going to have to beat out some really good players, or the Gators are having a bunch of injuries. So I think the transfer is a good thing, but how good probably depends on your expectations. The reality is he's replacing a guy like Chester Kimbrough. And so Kimbrough's contribution to the team last year, there was a contribution, but it wasn't something that was necessarily all that significant on the back end. I think that's sort of the floor. And then you look for him on special teams and you look for him maybe at the star position on the inside, but he's a little bit longer and lankier, and you probably think of him as being more of an outside corner. So maybe that pushes a guy like Marshall to the inside. The reality is that in Grantham's scheme, he likes guys who are versatile. That is one of the things you hear about Perkins, is he's got pretty good versatility. But this isn't a 5-star recruit who's going to come in and just blow everybody's socks off with his athletic ability. It's going to come down to, can he grasp the defensive scheme? And we saw last year with a lot of the guys who missed spring practice because of COVID that they didn't necessarily trust putting those guys in. So I think that's one of the places where I get a little bit more hesitant in terms of thinking about Perkins getting an awful lot of time, just in that Mullen and Grantham have not been people who have thrown guys into the fire and let them learn. And so they may have to do that this time with Perkins, because coming from junior college, then to Missouri, and now to Gainesville.
3-star prospect. So you're right. Not the 5-star kid, but I really he's picking up offers from Alabama. 6'2", you love the length on the corner. That's an NFL size corner right there.
Well, look, they only had 6 scholarship corners after Kimbrough left and a couple other guys. And so they needed depth back there. You're going to need depth in the SEC all over defense. I'm not sure that corner is the place where most fans looked at the team and said, this is where we need to bring in a transfer. But with Eric Gilbert not transferring, that does open up another spot. So they probably have one more left. If they really want to use it, they may also be able to back count from next year so that they can have an extra guy in the signing class or an extra transfer coming next year. That may be in the plans as well. I think corner's a solid addition. I'm not sure that, I would have focused on offensive line or defensive tackle, to be honest, if I was looking at either side and saying, where does Florida necessarily need help in 2021? But again, I think this is a good player. Like you said, he's got a lot of offers from a lot of good programs, but it'll be a question of how quickly can he pick up the defense, because the reality is that Grantham runs a complicated defense, and we've seen enough of both corners blitzing at the same time for our entire lifetime from last year. And so, It'll depend on how quickly he can pick up the scheme.
So he'll be blitzing off the bench too and come off the sideline. Maybe we'll have 3 corners blitzing next year. That'd be great. No, but in all honesty, I saw in the Missouri in one of the articles I was reading on the story, I was trying to look up why he transferred. Didn't get a solid reason on any official capacity, but he was a Missouri Tiger for exactly 92 days, they said. A little bit of a red flag that the guy's transferring that quick for you?
I mean, no, I think college football players at this point are going to transfer and be a little bit like free agents, at least for that one transfer that they're allowed. And since he was transferring from junior college, that didn't necessarily count towards his one transfer. And, Florida's a better school than Missouri. Let's be honest, right? If you have an opportunity to start at Florida or an opportunity to start at Missouri, you'd take the opportunity at Florida. Now he's going to have to beat out some people at Florida. I think he would have been a starter at Missouri. So, we'll see whether he's happy with it at the end of the day. The thing is at this point, he's used up his one transfer. So if you think about it being a red flag, he's going to have to sit out a year if he decides he wants to go someplace else. And I don't know that he has the eligibility left to do that. So if he's coming to Florida, he's going to be a Gator for the next couple of years, and we're going to get to see him grow and develop in this system.
Well, like I said, I can't complain about adding a 6'2", 190-pound corner at this point in the offseason. So get a little bit of depth to a secondary that desperately needs it. So let's move on to 4 bits. Will, Tom Fornelli of CBS Sports and the Cover 3 podcast on 24/7 Sports posted the top 25 Power 5 college football coaches heading into 2021. Dan Mullen checks in at number 10 on the list. He's ahead of the likes of PJ Fleck, Herm Edwards at Arizona State at 21. I thought was interesting. Cristobal at Oregon at 15. James Franklin checks in 13 at Penn State. Mac Brown at North Carolina at 12. Former national champion coach from Texas. And another national champion at number 11, Ed Orgeron, right behind Mullen. Will, in the top 10, the guys ahead of Mullen here, you got Matt Camp from 9 to 1 here. Matt Campbell at Iowa State, Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern, Kirby Smart at Georgia, Jimbo Fisher, Texas A&M, Kelly at Notre Dame, Day at Ohio State, Riley at Oklahoma, Dabo, Clemson, and of course, the one and only Nick Saban. Overall, I'm looking at the list, Will, and we'll put the link in our show notes if people want to check it out here. But I thought Fornelli did a good job. I don't have a lot of gripes with this list. I think Mullen, for his resume, I think he's got a solid resume at Mississippi State, building them up. But in terms of like championships and everything, I think gets a lot of respect on this list here. But personally, if I'm picking at it in the top 10 here, I'd probably go Day over Riley at 3. I'd go Jimbo over Kelly at 5. And I know Fitzgerald and Campbell, they may raise some eyebrows with Northwestern Iowa State being on this list. But, what did we see a story that Matt Campbell just turned down to like a $75 million contract from the Detroit Lions? He's probably the hottest coaching candidate in America right now. And if you don't follow a lot of Big Ten football, Northwestern is a constant overachiever with Pat Fitzgerald. They might have a season or two where they're a little bit off, but they play some good football. A lot of players drafted this year out of Northwestern.
Yeah, it's interesting that Campbell and Fitzgerald would be right in front of Mullen, just because Mullen essentially, if he was still at Mississippi State and he was putting out 8-4 and 9-3 years, they'd have him in front of Iowa State and Northwestern. They'd have him in front of Campbell and Fitzgerald with these rankings, right? He's almost getting penalized for being at Florida and the expectations being really, really high there. I think Campbell hasn't won a conference championship. Fitzgerald hasn't won a conference championship. Now, granted, Fitzgerald has to go up against the Ohio State buzzsaw, but Mullen has to go up against the Alabama buzzsaw, right? And, Iowa State not winning a conference title, I think, does say something about, granted, Ames is not exactly the college football hotbed, but you're really only up against Oklahoma, and Texas has been down. So is it really that impressive to, go 8-4, 9-3, maybe go 10-2 at Iowa State? It's impressive, but I don't know that it's as impressive as being but I don't know that it's as impressive as building a consistent winner at Mississippi State. That would be the thing that I would say there. I think I agree with you that Jimbo Fisher should be higher. Guys won a national championship, built Florida State into a powerhouse, and is building A&M into a powerhouse pretty much the same way. Brian Kelly, I think, is a little bit overrated at Notre Dame, just because Notre Dame doesn't ever have to play anybody. They certainly they have the opportunity to play USC, but USC hasn't been any good recently. They played Clemson twice last year and only beat them when they didn't have their starting quarterback. And every time they get to the playoffs, they get shellacked by 45 points. So, I'm not sure that I would put them.
Don't make me defend Brian Kelly. Hey, Notre Dame, they play tough schedule. They play tough schedule every year. and they could step up in some moments here or there. When they get to the biggest stages is where they struggle. But I'll tell you, that program, they transfer. I mean, look at how many did their entire offensive line go into the NFL this year? I mean, they're putting out quality players. That's recruiting right there. They're putting out quality product year in and year out on the field. Not my favorite team to watch year in and year out. Certainly not a big Notre Dame fan in general, but he's definitely done a great job with that program, considering where they were before he took over.
Dude, they'd finish 4th in the SEC, best case. 4th in the SEC, best case. And in fact, all the recruiting ire that we give Mullen for his recruiting, Brian Kelly's worse when it comes to recruiting to a national powerhouse with their own television contract.
Is it tougher to recruit to Notre Dame, though?
No, I don't think so.
I think it is.
I mean,
it is.
No, you've got
academic standards and everything else compared to an SEC school.
You go, well, yeah. I mean, if you're talking about Ole Miss, then yeah, you got to worry about academics. But Florida and Notre Dame aren't that far apart. Let's not. Let's not.
I'm not saying for the average student. I'm talking about for it's. I think it's a little different on the football side though at Notre Dame.
I don't know. I think Kelly. There's a reason they get shellacked by 45. It's because they get overrated. Then they get. Didn't they lose like 14 straight bowl games because they kept putting them in bowl games they didn't deserve to be in because they bring in eyes and then they get absolutely shellacked. So I agree.
I hate that you're even putting me in a position to kind of feel like I need to defend Notre Dame because I really don't. I don't like it. It's not enjoyable for me.
All right, everybody. Nick is a Notre Dame fan, and you need to give him crap about it. So, yeah, the other thing I would say is that Ed Orgeron and Mac Brown both have conference titles and both have national titles. And regardless of what you think of Orgeron, that dude brought in Joe Burrow. That wasn't like he inherited Joe Burrow. Right. It wasn't like Joe Burrow. And Joe Burrow didn't play real well the first year he was there either. He was kind of equivalent to Felipe Franks in 2018, and then obviously considerably better than Felipe Franks in 2019, though Franks only played 2 or 3 games. But, Orgeron brought in the keys. Jamar Chase was the guy that he pulled away from Florida. He was committed to Florida, and then he flipped him over to LSU. So you look at the keys to that national championship team, Orgeron was heavily involved in that. I think there's a perception that Orgeron doesn't know what he's doing because of his time at Ole Miss and because he's not exactly the most culturally refined person, and also because LSU
last year didn't help.
Well, and LSU's had some scandalous type things that make it seem like their titles might have been dirty, but allegedly. But the reality is he's winning on the field. He won at USC before they decided to go with Clay Helton, and they probably should have stayed at Orgeron. And I'd say the same thing with Mac Brown, right? He's obviously spent a lot of time away from the game. His last few years at Texas were a little bit underwhelming, but the dude won national titles, had guys like Vince Young and Colt McCoy at quarterback. And if you're going to start looking, and now he's building North Carolina into a team that can be a real competitor. So
stunning what he's been accomplished at North Carolina so far.
Like, it's funny because I actually think Mullen deserves to be at 10. I just think Orgeron and Brown should be in front of him, and then that they should have Campbell and Pat Fitzgerald from Northwestern behind him. But interesting discussion at any case.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to decide, because again, even you could look at it, Campbell and Fitzgerald are ahead of 2 guys that won national titles. That's pretty impressive stuff there. But again, Orgeron, you want to see him do it again. You want to see Mac Brown, as good as that North Carolina team was last year. Do you remember that game against Florida State? What were they losing? 28-0 at halftime or something like that? I mean, they just played terrible in Tallahassee last year. So that program hasn't totally arrived on the elite level. Very good, definite improvement in North Carolina. But I mean, you could say similar things with Mullins. There's been some up and down with ups and downs with Mullins so far, but definitely on the right track. I think 10 is pretty respectable. Well, we're going to go over to 6 picks, and we'll talk about that number 7 coach in America. And we're going to stop real quick. I'm going to introduce it, and then we'll play a quick clip for the audience here. But Bud Elliott is one of my favorite voices in the college football world from 24/7 Sports. He does his homework, gives well thought out opinions, and he offered an opinion on this week's episode of the Cover 3 podcast. I'll let y'all check it out.
All right, let me ask you this, and this may go viral, or I may just get yelled at by both fan bases. Any Florida fan would trade Kirby Smart for Dan Mullen? Probably every single one would rather have Kirby Smart, right? Because they don't think Dan Mullen's Florida team can recruit at that very, very upper echelon that you have to have if you want to topple Saban, if you want to actually win it all. Yeah, Kirby Smart makes a lot of mistakes in game, but Dan Mullen doesn't get the very, very top guys on the recruiting trail that Saban and Kirby do. And when it comes down to it, he's not winning the national title there.
Don't you think there's a
I
portion of-
think Florida fans would much rather have Kirby.
Well, Will, I think the best thing he said was the intro where he said, I may get yelled at by both fan bases. Because saying that you would trade, that every Florida fan would trade Dan Mullen for Kirby Smart, I mean, you're just stirring it up right there. But great topic for May in college football, number one. So kudos to Bud on that. But I have to, we exchanged texts on this here earlier in the week here. And for all, it's an interesting dynamic with Mullen and Smart, because Mullen's the guy who on the field you trust more than Smart, but off the field with the recruiting and everything, Smart's dominated the country in that field. So, Will, my question for you is, would you trade, would you be one of those, every single one of the Florida fans that Bud Elliott said would trade Dan Mullen for Kirby Smart?
I think, as sorry as I am to say this, I am one of those people who Bud's talking about. So look, I think the question that he's asking really brings two questions to the forefront. The first one is, do I think this is a coach who can win a national championship if things continue the way they've gone thus far in their tenures? And I think the answer is probably yes for both guys. I think Smart came within a play or two of winning a championship in 2018. He's going to be in the hunt every year, whether or not he can get over the Saban hump, whether or not he's capable of being able to get out of his own way as a coach. He's going to give himself a bunch of chances. And in some cases, when you look at the history of college football, guys who didn't win national championships right away are still guys who gave themselves a lot of chances. Bobby Bowden comes to mind. Tom Osborne comes to mind. Even Steve Spurrier had the Fiesta Bowl fiasco in 1995 before winning the championship in 1996. And so, you know, I think Smart probably has the opportunity to do that. And I think, you know, depending upon how JT Daniels plays this year, may even get it this year, if in fact Daniels turns into the quarterback that he was projected when he came in. For Mullen, though, I think the answer is yes as well, right? But it depends heavily on Emory Jones or Anthony Richardson being a transcendent quarterback. That's always been the issue with recruiting when at least I've talked about recruiting with Dan Mullen, is that he's shown we can do with Felipe Franks and with Kyle Trask at quarterback, but he really needs a transcendent guy if he's going to be able to win big. At Mississippi State, he got up to number one in the country because he had a guy like Dak Prescott. So he's shown the ability to do that. But, you know, is he going to be able to do that consistently? I mean, that's really the question. And then that's where I go to sort of the second question. So the first question is, do I think he can win the national championship if things keep going this way? And the second is, if this coach leaves, whether for firing or another job or anything like that, can another coach come in and quickly win big with his players? And that's where I think the differentiation comes in between these two, right? If Georgia gets fed up with Kirby Smart and decides they want to get rid of him and make a change, and they bring in a guy who's a really good X's and O's coach. I mean, look at what Miami did with Butch Davis, and then they brought in Larry Coker. I mean, Coker couldn't coach his way out of a paper bag, and that team won the national championship. And so, you know, I went to Florida during the Ron Zook era. Zook was Kirby Smart before Kirby Smart existed. And, you know, he said stupid things. He lost games he had no business losing on a regular basis, but he was a huge part of that 2006 championship. And so, you know, look, I get what Bud Elliott's saying. I get the question. I just, you know, at the end of the day, I think in college football, recruiting is more important than coaching. And we're going to find out, because no one's going anywhere. And so we're going to find out. But I think if you asked me, you know, percentage wise, how likely is it that Florida wins a national championship with Dan Mullen versus Kirby Smart? If Smart's recruiting at this level, I think Florida probably has a better chance with him in charge.
All right. First off, you're breaking my heart here. You're breaking my heart. But here's the thing. Bud Elliott is making a scientific, he's trying to be like, he's trying to stay back from it. No emotions involved in it. He's an FSU guy, as a matter of fact. I'm fairly certain he's a Florida State guy. So for him to say that, not that big of a deal, where he sits there and goes like, hey, he's just making a point as to why he thinks Kirby's better than Mullen on that. And that's his opinion. But one of the things he ended the point with was, and when it comes down to it, he, meaning Mullen, he's not winning the national title there. I think Florida fans would much rather have Kirby. And the point is like, where's Kirby's national title? I know he came close. I know he's close. But if I told you that there's a resume, if you go down the resume and you look at 3 seasons with 10 wins or more, at least 4 seasons where the team's ranked in the top 10, but he's yet to notch a win against the top dog in the conference, would I be describing Kirby Smart? Yes, but it's also Jim Harbaugh. What's the perception of Jim Harbaugh right now? Another one. 3 seasons with 10 or more wins, at least 4 seasons where his team has been ranked in the top 10. Won conference title a few years back, but he struggled to find the next QB after losing out on a commitment from Justin Fields. That's James Franklin, Will. That's not Kirby Smart. That's James Franklin. Another guy that things are at Penn State are okay. They had a couple nice seasons with him, but they haven't identified that next quarterback. Mark Richt finished at the top 10 4 times in his first 6 seasons. At a time, the thing he had in common with Kirby is Florida was down. They were going through those Zook years that you referenced. The first few years under Kirby have been among the best stretch of Georgia football since the days of Herschel Walker. But he's failed at one thing, and in Florida, he had a chance to really put some serious distance between Georgia and Florida, and I'd say he's failed to do it because in year 3, Mullen catches him in a big way. And you could say, yeah, we caught him on the field, but maybe top to bottom, the rosters aren't the same, and like Georgia's got deeper roster. Yeah, he's got more talent, and yet what happened last October? And I think we're going to see Mullen be a thorn in Kirby's side it's one of the most interesting rivalries in college football right now. But the thing you have to look at is on paper, Kirby basically only managed to convert a half of a decade of Florida being completely down into one conference title. And you talk about getting those shots over and over again. I know this is the era of Alabama, but why do we always give Kirby all this credit? Because he's attached to Saban and he recruits incredibly. I mean, he's an amazing recruiter. Nobody doubts that. But what's he accomplished on the field in terms of hanging banners? And I would much rather watch a guy with Mullen style. I like that Mullen is a little bit, you don't know what he's going to say. I like that about him. He wears the visor. He's a little unpredictable. That's very in line with our culture at Florida. We had a visor wearing guy that was a little unpredictable for a long time. Urban Meyer.
Yeah, but that guy won like 6 straight SEC championships.
I know, but Alabama was on probation, so let's get Alabama back on probation, and maybe we can start winning some titles again. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what I'm saying. Like these things you have to look into why they're happening. And I'm saying Kirby has had everything go his way. Tennessee is nothing. Florida was terrible, and he's turned that into one conference title. I don't know why Kirby gets all this praise. It's because he recruits well. Great. Well, guess what? You have the best car in the neighborhood and you drive like a grandma. You're not maximizing what you do, man.
You're really making my point for me, which is that nobody doubts that Mullen's a better on-field coach, and is probably. I mean, I don't watch Georgia religiously, but I imagine people are frustrated by watching that offense play. I certainly would be. I get frustrated watching them play when they play Florida sometimes on the offensive side of the ball. No one is saying that Kirby's a better player, and if you told me which would I rather have for the Buffalo Bills, who are my team in the NFL, Kirby Smart or Dan Mullen, I'm gonna tell you Dan Mullen, because in the NFL. I think coaching is like 95% of the job, along with sort of placating egos and relationships and things like that. There is no recruiting, right? It's whoever wants to pay you the most is the guy who gets the guy who gets the player. So you just deal with the salaries and you bring the best players that you can in, and you win at the margins, which is something that Mullen is quite adept at doing. But at the college level, where recruiting is really important, you're making the point, which is that even if Kirby can't get over the hump, if they find a guy who comes in afterwards, like if Kirby got let go and they brought in Mullen next year, I think Mullen won the title. I think he'd be able to scheme with the players who are sitting there in Georgia. So, I mean, it's apples and oranges, right? But the question,
he's the better coach,
right? But the question that you're asking me is, which would I rather have at the college level? And at the college level, recruiting is more important to consistent winning than X's and O's. You have a limited amount of time you can spend with the players. You have a limited amount of time you can actually develop them. And I think that plays a role as well. So, do I hope Mullen wins? And I hope Mullen proves me wrong? Absolutely. I've seen enough hiccups from Kirby Smart to not be incredibly confident that he's going to be able to get the job done. But the thing that I fear is that Georgia finds a guy who can recruit close to as good as Kirby Smart, who's a better coach if they decide to jettison Kirby, or if Kirby decides to go to the NFL. And then all of a sudden you're in trouble, because if you have that kind of talent with Mullen's kind of acuity in terms of getting the most out of the guys on the field, that you're in deep at that point. Whereas if you said the opposite, if you said, okay, now Mullen leaves for the NFL. He was looking last year, right? Say Mullen leaves for the NFL and somebody new comes in. Well, that guy's going to have to recruit for 2 or 3 years to get to the point where he's competing consistently for SEC championships. So from a roster health perspective, I think recruiting is important.
I don't need to see my 5-star quarterback handed off 35 times a game, splitting carries between 4 or 5-star running backs because they all touch the ball 8 or 9 times each. And it's the biggest. You do not maximize that roster at Georgia. And that is the ultimate problem with the Kirby Smart era. And you know what? Alabama doesn't do that. Saban doesn't coach like that. Kirby's trying to win like Alabama won in 2009. And it's not going to get him. That's not going to get him over the hump. Oh, we got JT Daniels now. Oh, a guy from a struggling USC program is going to come in and win the Heisman. Just like we had to listen to all the Heisman talk last year, which they get so much hype in the offseason. Will, the preseason magazines are coming out. Georgia's getting a bunch of hype again. I've had enough of this, and I would not trade Dan Mullen for Kirby Smart. So if you got anything final to end it on, I'll let you get the final word of it before we head to $1.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's Mississippi State, but Mullen didn't beat LSU, Auburn, or Alabama much while he was there. He's 1-2 against Georgia and 0-1 against Alabama. Here's the reality is that, you know, you got to win those games if you're not going to bring in the absolute best of the best from a recruiting perspective. He hasn't done that yet. Once he does that on a consistent basis, if it's 2-2 after this year because he takes down Smart again, I think we reassess and give him a hell of a lot more credit for how good of a coach he is. Yep. But if it's 1-3, what are you going to say at that point, right? So this year, I think actually really does start to bring some clarity around that rivalry. If with JT Daniels in there on offense and Emory Jones in there on offense for Florida, so Florida's going to have a new quarterback versus Georgia having a guy coming back with that kind of pedigree who got his feet wet at least at the end of last year. If Smart can't pull this one out this year, then I think that's on him, and I think it does start to lend some credence to what you're saying. But you know, most people looking at the preseason are picking Florida to be 1-3 after this year.
If we're banking on QB development being the core to the Georgia Bulldogs season, I like my chances right now. If I'm Florida, I like my chances. That's all I'm going to say. All right. We got all summer to talk about it, Will. Let's move on to $1. Heard a great story from Bob Stoops this week on the #1 ranked podcast with RJ Young, where he told a story about Steve Spurrier and how that he got a hold of him after the this was post 1996 Fiesta Bowl, after the 95 season. The unbeaten Gators go out to Tempe, get shellacked. That horrendous Tommy Frazier highlight running through the entire defense cartoonishly. Spurrier essentially called under a pseudonym. I'll let Bob Stoops tell the story here.
It's an interesting note to me because there's an assistant coach at Oklahoma State. And I called it this gambit, and I can't remember his name. Do you? The assistant coach that Steve Spurrier was saying that he was.
It was Lawson Holland.
Thank you, sir.
He had been an assistant coach at Oklahoma State, and I had known Lawson from going on some golf trips that assistant coaches went on. So Coach Spurrier couldn't get through to me. No one would ever patch him through to me. So he said he was Lawson Holland. And that he wanted to talk to me, but he came clean as soon as I got on the phone. He goes, "Well, Bobby, I got to tell you, I don't want to be truthful here." He goes, "I had to do whatever I could to get a hold of you." So he goes, "I said I was Lawson Holland." Anyway, and I didn't believe him at first. He said, "This is Steve Spurrier," and I'm kind of quiet. I'm like, this is one of my buddies playing some kind of joke on me or something, And then the more he talked, I'd heard him enough on TV. I didn't know Coach at all. I said, this really is Steve Spurrier, and I'm not one of those guys who chases jobs. I didn't even know they had a job open, So, we talked for probably 20, 30 minutes. He called me the next day. We talked again. He left me a voicemail at home, and my wife, she hears it. She goes, "Is that the Steve Spurrier?" I go, "Yeah." I go, "You and I need to talk tonight. There's this is about to happen." And then anyhow, we worked it out. It was great. And, that was another huge break for me. We remain, coaches like family. He and Jerry, his wife, they're like family to Carol and I. And, very close to this day. And in fact, here in a couple of weeks, I got to go on a golf trip to Pebble Beach with them here in a couple of weeks. So you got to go, huh? You got to go play Pebble Beach, huh? Yeah, and we catch up in Florida quite a bit too. We have places there. I got a place there by Coach on the beach. So anyway, I was and I emulated about everything we did at Oklahoma. I copied off of what we were doing, what Coach Spurrier was doing at Florida, and we're a lot alike personality wise too. So it really helped me to be around him. to realize I could be the way I am and still have success at the highest level.
So, Will, what did you know about Lawson Holler at Oklahoma State? I absolutely love this story with Spurrier, and it's another reason why he's the GOAT.
Well, I mean, Spurrier, it's funny because people don't think of him as being an elite recruiter. But man, that dude, that's a little bit of subterfuge there by the old head ball coach, making sure that he got a hold of his man and then made him like his best friend, right? I mean, in the clip, Stoops is still talking about like how he and Jerry and his wife and everybody are just all great friends and mentors. I mean, I'm sure that's genuine, but at the same time, to be able to convince somebody that this is where you need to be and that that you're going to be able to make your career by coming to Florida. I mean, Spurrier recruited an awful lot of good players, but I'm not sure he brought anybody any more important than Bob Stoops to the program.
Yeah, a key piece of that 1996 title run right there. And Will, that's why I always say recruiting is the most important thing. All right, I'm very consistent with that message, right? No. Anyway, another thing to recommend to people, James Bates from those teams, that title team 96, he has a YouTube series. It's a cartoon, and it's like they're like 2-minute stories, but they're called the head ball coach stories. If you haven't seen that, I highly recommend you check that out. Will, we're wrapping up another episode of Stand Up Holler. Got anything for the folks before we head out?
No, I just appreciate everybody tuning in. Certainly hit the subscribe button down below. The more subscribers we get, the more often we can do this and hopefully at some point get paid for doing this too. So we need to get up to 1,000 subscribers to make that happen. We've gotten a lot recently, but certainly the more you can subscribe, the more that helps us out. We appreciate it. And I'm sure there will be some good comments from everybody on the Kirby Smart versus Dan Mullen debate. Obviously we had to, one of us had to choose each side. So, we'll leave it to you to decide who drew the short straw on that one.
I stand by everything I said. I'm fine with it. All right. Hey, thank you for everybody for listening. And yeah, thank you for continuing to subscribe, share this content with people. We want to get this out there to Gator Nation. This has been another episode of Stand Up and Holler. I'm Nick Knudsen for Will Miles. Go Gators.
Go Gators.
Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel, join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week, and check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles, and as always, go Gators.